This is Death, Lies, and Alibis. Hello, I'm your host, Christy. Out here in rural Ohio, the nights are quiet, but not always peaceful. Every silence has a name, and every shadow has a story. And every cold case carries a weight you can feel if you stand still long enough. Today, we step into another one of those stories, forgotten by some and never forgotten by others. So, let's go together to where the questions are still hiding. Content warning. This episode contains discussion of homicide, domestic violence, suicide, opioid use, and sex trafficking. Listener discretion is advised. She wasn't found in a bed or in her home. She was thrown away like trash, literally stuffed into garbage bags and discarded, left in a ditch at night as if her life meant nothing.
911, what is the address? The emergency. There's a dead body. Highway. If they're coming down Highway 79, 413, when you pass Newark stereo on your left, if you turn right on the left, it's right there, I can't tell. It's like, not even 1 mile up. In between, like, same guys. In a plastic bag. But it looks just like a body. Honestly, I'm scared and I'm thinking that. How do you know that it's a dead body, sir? It looks like it's a black trash bag, and it's like it's tied up, but like you can see the head bump and the feet. And so like it looks like a body, man. It's on that material. What's your name? Okay, Kitty. You're at Military Out, right? Yes, ma'am. Okay, you're over by Green Valley Drive. Yes, ma'am. Okay. I'm like in Green Valley Drive. All right, hold on just a minute. Let me get you over to the sheriff's office, okay? Hold on just a second. Can you send someone here, like, right now? There's a dead body in the ditch, ma'am. John, listen to me. I'm going to have you talk to them, okay? Because they've already had a deputy in the area. So I need to just let you talk to them instead of transferring these messages over. So just stay on the line and let me have you talk to them, okay? Hold on just a minute. You said it's in a trash bag, like a black trash bag? Like someone on the way here, and you have to please send it back there. Like they said, oh, like them. Yeah. We're going to have an officer come out there, okay? I'm trying to get all this information in here because I'm taking a call on my partner dispatch that says she's going off of my note. It's only uncomfortable. I was just looking at it, and I'm right down the road here. Okay, so does it look, I just need to take evidence first on what it appeared to look like to you. I need to get very close. And then you can see the outline of like the bag is tied and not like on the same side. Well, I'm not playing around here. I know, sir, I know. We have officers coming, okay? I just need this information for them, okay? Okay, I swear to the black spot bands up like that. I'm right here in Ontario, okay, the right side. Right there. Officer, I mean, okay. Do you want me to stay on the phone with you until they get there? Thank you. I gotta see how far. Hold on. Sorry. Okay, I don't think that they're very far out, okay? So I would say probably no more than 10 or 15 minutes. Alright. I'll call back. Hey, you can always call back. Do you want me to give you the non-emergency number? Alright. This is going to be the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office. Okay, perfect. Okay. Alright, if anything changes, give me a call back. But stay right there at the carry out. That way the officer can meet with you, okay? Okay, thank you so much. You're welcome.
Sydney Hutchison, Sydney Larcher, Sydney Bryson, and on paperwork found after her death, Nova Lee Rains. Every name was a chapter, a survival tactic, or maybe a secret she couldn't afford to share. People in her life say she told them she was in the witness protection program. Maybe that was true, or maybe it was fear talking. Maybe it was a woman trying to outrun a world that kept closing in. But before the headlines and the labels, she was a real woman, imperfect and human, and deserving of way more better of an ending than she got. What happened to Sydney wasn't just tragic, it was preventable. and she walked down the aisle in August. By December, she was being cremated. Her husband, James, remembers watching a news anchor call her a homeless drug user with $1,000 Crime Stoppers reward. No mention of her marriage, no mention of her roots, and no mention of her life. And to understand what was taken from her, we have to go back, before the ditch and before the chaos, to the girl she was before she ever became a murder case. Sydney Elaine Hutchison was born on September 6, 1988, and from the very beginning, her life was complicated. Because of family circumstances, she grew up with her grandparents, Barb and Greg Hutchison, down in Naples, Florida. For a long time, she believed they were her parents. That's what she knew, and that's who raised her. And then one day, she found out the truth. And that kind of discovery, well, it doesn't just change paperwork, it shakes the ground under your feet. I mean, if the people you trust the most aren't who you thought they were, how do you ever feel secure again? For Sydney, that moment, it left a wound. Not because her grandparents didn't love her, they most certainly did, but because identity shocks like that, they cut deep. Psychologists talk about it all the time. Kids who go through that kind of confusion can grow up with a quiet ache, a fear of being lied to again, and a sense of abandonment that they can't always explain. For Sydney, those questions, where do I belong? Who can I trust and who am I really? They followed her straight into adulthood. And when the media later stripped her humanity down to a headline, it wasn't the first time she'd been erased. But her childhood wasn't terrible. She grew up under the Florida sun, going to Disney World, building memories and family traditions like any other kid. It was messy at times, like a lot of families, but never neglect. And Sydney, she was creative, very talented, a soft heart, the kind of people that people remember. She played on the Golden Eagles marching band at Naples High School. Friends talked about how bright she was, how she could pick up any instrument and just get it. She was smart, sensitive, very artistic. And somewhere in all that teenage chaos, she met a good looking guy named Jonathan Larcher. High school sweethearts, goofy, romantic, the kind of love where everything feels possible and you believe you'll beat the odds simply because you love hard enough. And for a while, that was her world. A girl in Florida trying to find her place, trying to build something real out of the pieces that life handed her. But life doesn't stay in that hopeful place for long. Love, pressure, and addiction start creeping in around the edges. Slow at first, and then not all at once. That's when happily ever after turned into just trying to hang on. Life doesn't come with a manual, and trouble doesn't always hit like a lightning bolt. Sometimes it sneaks in slow, and then suddenly it's everywhere. That's what addiction did to Cindy and Jonathan. According to what Sydney later told her husband, and what others close to her confirmed, their marriage got volatile. Young love is intense and it's passionate, but it can also be toxic, especially when addiction takes the wheel. The two of them eventually became parents, and those kids, they meant everything to them. And when you're living inside addiction, stability slips through your fingers no matter how hard you try to hold on. They made a gut wrenching choice to let others raise the children so the kids could have a better and safer shot in life. Painful, my God, yes. But it came from love. And in 2008, public records show that Sydney and Jonathan left Florida for Ohio. They stayed with relatives in Heath and Gahanna area before finally getting a place of their own. And for a short moment, it looked like things were getting better. A fresh start, a chance. But addiction doesn't care about zip codes. The same struggles followed him north. The fights, the arrests, the evictions, one blow after another. And every eviction chipped at their dignity. Every argument cracked the foundation a little more. Every new charge pushed them further from the life they really wanted. They were trying, but their world was collapsing faster than they could rebuild it. And eventually, everything came to a breaking point. And for Sydney, that breaking point wasn't just another fight or another eviction, it was final. It's the kind of loss that doesn't just change your life, it shatters it. In 2011, her world fell apart. According to official reports, Jonathan died by suicide. It broke Sydney in a way she never recovered from. Jonathan wasn't just her husband, he was her person, the one who's seen every high, every low, and loved her anyways. Losing him split her life in two. The before, when she still believed they had time, and the after, when all she could do was carry the weight of what she had lost. Grief like that doesn't fade. It weaves itself into your days, your nights, your choices, your breathing. And in Sydney's case, it stayed with her right up to the end. After Jonathan died, she went back to Florida, already broken, trying to survive a world that didn't care if she was grieving. But grief doesn't hit pause on real life. Bills don't stop, rent doesn't wait, and when you're drowning inside your own head, the rest of the world doesn't slow down for you. And Florida wasn't kind this time. Sydney spiraled. She drifted in and out of courtrooms and jail cells. And in 2017, her name showed up in a police blotter again, tied to a violent case that had guns, drugs, kidnapping, all tangled together. And according to investigators, two men were accused of holding another man at gunpoint, forcing him to drive around, threatening his life, even making him strip and sit blindfold in a bathtub. Sydney got swept up in the fallout. She was arrested, but she was charged with possession, DUI, and giving false information. And her mugshot from that day is so hard to look at. Her eyes are wide, her face is hollow. It's like a ghost of herself, and it's already halfway gone. Later, prosecutors dropped most of the serious charges against the men for lack of evidence, but the damage was already done. Sydney was tangled in a dangerous world she didn't control. And people just love to judge the headlines. But if you look closer, what you really see is a young woman surrounded by chaos, manipulation, and men who had the power. After that arrest, she left Florida again. This time, she landed in Columbus, Ohio. Florida had chewed her up and spit her out, and Columbus wasn't a clean slate. It was just a new stage. Different skyline and different clubs, same predators waiting in the dark. Columbus is where this next chapter of Sydney's story unfolds. Under the neon glow of the strip clubs, she stepped into the nightlife scene, working at places like Sirens, the Dollhouse, and Centerfolds. And on the surface, it had flashy lights, loud music, and fast cash. The kind of places people pretend are harmless, but behind the scene, it was darker, much darker. Now, Sirens was the big name, the same club where Stormy Daniels was arrested in 2018. Now, that arrest turned into lawsuits, embarrassment, and even accusations of misconduct against law enforcement. The Dollhouse was smaller and grittier, with a reputation tied to overdoses and fights and biker clubs. Centerfold, it had its own bad vibe. Now, these weren't fun, glittery, dancer girl fantasy worlds, okay? These were survival zones. Sydney lived with two other dancers, Carla and Alexis. And maybe it looked like independence at first, a place to start over in a fresh chapter. But her friends saw a shift. She got guarded and secretive, careful about what she said and who she said it to. And over, the same names and groups came up from people who knew her. What some dancers called the Russian mafia. And according to multiple people, Sydney claimed she worked with them and almost bragged about it at times. But she never wanted to be around them. It was like this twisted mix of admiration and fear, a love-hate kind of thing, with a lot more fear under the surface. Then there was some whispers about powerful men, men with money and connections, men who could get away with anything because of who they were. Some people say Sydney crossed paths with these men. Others say she knew too much. And everyone agrees. She hated that life. She wasn't out here partying. She wasn't living some wild stripper girl fantasy. She was stuck and working under pressure. And according to multiple sources, she was working under control. Now, one friend described her to me as a bright light that was dimmed by arrogant men who used and abused her. And this friend, she told me she had brought gas and food and hygiene products to Sydney, but Sydney would never take money. She had too much pride. And she told me about one night Sydney was leaving work and things turned pretty unsafe. A man followed her out of the club and he was angry, demanding, and refused to let it go. Sydney drove straight to a gas station where she knew her friend would be. It was a safe place. And her friend came out and confronted the man and made him back off. But before he left, the man tried to trash Sydney's name, calling her fake and calling her a user. It was a lie. Her friend knew it. And she's speaking up now because she wants the world to know who Sydney actually was. Because behind the stage lights, behind all the dollar bills, Sydney was fighting for her life. She was fighting for her freedom. She wanted to be free in a world designed to swallow women whole the moment they stopped being useful. And every day that she stayed in that life, that was a risk that grew sharper. Because what was she walking through? I mean, it wasn't just dancing. It was the front door to something bigger, uglier, and a lot more organized than most people want to believe. For women like Sydney, dancing wasn't just a job, it was survival. And survival came with unspoken, ruthless rules. People close to her say she was caught in a world where drugs and exploitation blended together. The clubs weren't just entertainment, they were part of a larger machine. Some women were pushed into sex work and kept compliant through drugs, fear, and debts that could never escape. And once you're in that world, getting out can be deadly. Those who knew Sydney said she started seeing the bigger picture, how the drugs, the clubs, and the men, and the corruption all connected. What she saw looked a lot like organized trafficking, not just some shady managers or dangerous clients. And some allegations point toward people with power, real power, inside the system power. And that's not fantasy. Court records show that the Columbus Vice Unit faced lawsuits and even an FBI investigation for harassment, abuse, and corruption. So imagine Sydney, already being exposed, suddenly realizing how deep it all goes. Who do you run to when both the predators and the protectors hold the power? And here's the truth of streets. You don't have to be a confirmed informant to be at risk. A rumor is enough. People believe you're talking, if people think that you're cooperating, that alone can get you killed. Those around her said she grew jumpier, more guarded, more afraid. She was carrying secrets, that's for sure. And maybe someone didn't want her to survive them. And in the middle of all that fear, one claim kept surfacing from different people in different places. And said that was Sydney kept saying she was protected, or at least she believed she was. She said she was in the witness protection program. But in all my research, I can't find anything. But I wouldn't expect to, right? I mean, they don't freely give out confidential information to anyone. By around 2018, Sydney found herself back in Licking County. And on paper, it looks like a quiet place. Small town, country roads, nothing too dramatic. But for Sydney, it wasn't an escape. The threat didn't disappear. Again, we're just in a different zip code. This is when James Bryson enters her life. And by the time he showed up, Sydney was already walking a tightrope. One wrong step, one wrong person, one wrong night, and everything could collapse. But James didn't see the broken parts of her. He saw the girl who still had color left in her world. And her favorite color was blue. It was everywhere. Her clothes, her pins, her jewelry, even her hair. And the day he met her hair was this soft, beautiful blue. He said it made her stand out in a way that felt bold, like she was trying to reclaim some piece of herself. And from that moment on, he and his friends called her Blue. And for him, it wasn't just a nickname, it was a connection, a reminder that she was still trying to shine through everything she had survived. But don't let that warmth fool you, because the danger didn't disappear when she married him. The money, the drugs, the people with the power, all of it was still there, woven through the background of her life. And Sydney's relationship with James wasn't some fairy tale, okay? It was messy, it was toxic, and it was fueled by addiction on both sides. James wasn't a saint, he admits that himself. He pulled her into places she should have never been. He took her around people who treated addiction like a currency. They fed each other's habits and spiraled together. From the outside, it might have looked like sort of a relationship, but up close, it was survival tied in knots with trauma. James has told me more than once that he doesn't know his wife's full past. He only knew the pieces that she trusted him with. But he says he loved her enough to marry her. And for Sydney, she wanted love. She wanted her children back. She wanted freedom from everything that had ever controlled her. She trusted James to help her get that, to protect her, and be the one who chose her without conditions. But James, he couldn't keep that promise. He swears Blue is his soulmate, two broken people trying to build something solid on top of their addiction and grief and old wounds that never healed right. And unfortunately, James found him placed in jail once more for drug trafficking, leaving Sydney alone, broke, and desperately seeking safety in her last days. Now, according to James, late on Saturday, September 26, 2020, shortly before Sydney disappeared, she called him, possibly from a hotel in Newark. James claims she sounded terrified. He said she told him something that he's repeated ever since. These people are going to kill me and nobody's going to care because I'm just a junkie. James said he begged her to tell him where she was. He says she wouldn't or couldn't, and the call ended suddenly. And according to James, he never heard from her again. He had no idea that would be the last time he ever heard her voice. And that call, after it, everything spiraled. Because just over a month later, Sydney would be found discarded in a ditch, wrapped in black trash bags on a freezing December day. So here's the real question. Who was Sydney really trying to run from, and what or who was she trying to escape? Love gave Sydney hope, but someone took that hope away. To understand who could have taken that hope and how, we have to follow her footsteps. Not in theory, not in rumor, but in real places. The houses, the hotels, the garages. Because the map of where she slept and who owned those properties, that's its own kind of evidence. One allegation that stands out, and we haven't confirmed this yet. Sources say that Sydney allegedly worked with CODE. That's our Central Ohio Drug Enforcement Task Force. That's the same task force that has run major undercover operations all over Ohio. Also, my source says Sydney helped set up a guy in Buckeye Lake. Now, we're going to discuss that further in episode 2. But that one case alone, it could have put a target on her back. And if she did it once, everyone else in that world is going to be wondering, who's next? If Sydney was connected to CODE, whether officially or even unofficially, it would explain why her name kept popping up in so many case files. It's rumored to be in several documents, and that's incredible. But it would explain why people whispered that she was setting people up. And it would explain why she was in harm's way. Because, like I said before, in that world, it doesn't matter if you're actually are an informant. The rumor alone, well, we all know. Snitches get stitches and wind up in ditches. Exactly where Sydney was found. Now, all law enforcement agencies use confidential informants every day. They do. But they don't necessarily protect them. But they do use them. And a CI isn't treated like a person with a life or a family because they're a tool, a source. They are a means to an end. And once the department gets what it needs, the informant is left right where the heat lives. Now, people imagine CIs get security or backup. No, no, they don't. It's nothing like the witness protection program. Instead, they stay in the same houses, the same circles, the same streets filled with the people they're giving information on. And detectives don't shield them from rumors. They don't warn them when things start getting hot. And once someone in that world believes you're talking, you're on your own. If Sydney ever cooperated, even once, and she was at risk, she was exposed from both sides, the people she was informing on and the people who were using her. And the harsh truth is this: when a CI goes missing or turns up dead, the system shrugs and moves on. They do, because to them, informants are irreplaceable. That's the world Sydney was living in. And it's a world that never cared enough to keep her alive. That's my opinion. And that's where we leave her for now. Not as a headline, not as a rumor, but as a woman who was caught between the streets and the system with a target on her back either way. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a choice. We either look away like everyone else did, or we start asking the questions they never wanted asked. One detail keeps coming up when locals talk about Sydney's final days. Now, I want to be very clear here. I'm not saying it proves anything, but it does raise important questions. See, Detective Todd Green worked narcotics, and according to multiple sources, Sydney was in regular contact with him the period leading up to her disappearance. Now, those sources say she was being used as a confidential informant, cycling in and out of the investigations the same way many vulnerable people do. I'm told Sydney and Detective Green were working pretty close enough that her name was known well inside the unit, close enough that he was one of the last people she was in contact with before she vanished. And then something happened. According to a source close to the detective, contact with Sydney suddenly stopped just days before she was found. When that happened, I'm told Detective Green expressed concern, even saying he had a feeling she had been dead after not hearing from her from a while. Now, that detail matters because it suggests Sydney was alive much closer to December 3rd than some people are saying. Not gone for weeks, but days. It also raises a question we can't ignore. Why was Detective Green one of the last people Sydney stayed in contact with, while family and friends were desperately trying to find her? An inside source close to Sydney told me they lost contact with her around October 23rd or 24th. She read the message and then never responded again. And after that was silence. Her family was searching. Friends were going to dangerous places looking for her. People were actively worried about her safety. Yet, Sydney wasn't replying to them. So, why was law enforcement, specifically one narcotics detective, the last consistent point of contact? To be clear here, I am not implying Detective Green was involved in her death. I am not. What I'm questioning, okay, is this. Listen, how deeply embedded was Sydney in an ongoing investigations during her final days? What situations was she being placed in? What was he doing and using her for? How much pressure was she under? And did anyone at all recognize just how unsafe she'd become? Those are questions that still don't have any answers. And when someone vanishes after being in constant contact with law enforcement while everyone else is locked out, that's not an accusation, that's a gap. See, and gaps are exactly where cold cases hide the truth. Now, then there's Detective Kyle Boester. I'm probably not saying his name right, and I apologize. His name comes up often when people talk about narcotics work in this area, and especially in conversations about Sydney. On the street, we hear that he too may have been working with her as a confidential informant, that Sydney was cooperating in hopes of easing the pressure on herself or possibly on James also. Now, at the very least, she was trying to survive a system that already had its hooks into both of them. Now, that claim comes up repeatedly. And when I asked directly, it wasn't outright denied. Detective Kyle was a part of CODE. It's the high level regional narcotics task force here, and that matters. And today he holds a senior position with the Licking County Sheriff's Department. That's a promotion. I did request his job performance records, and what I received is that he has a clean record. There's no disciplinary actions, no red flags in his file. And beyond that, there's no additional details that were provided. I did reach out to the detective, and I'll share what he has to say about Sydney's case, and I will have that in our Facebook group. That's where the trail stops for now, and it's important to say this clearly. Code does rely heavily on confidential informants, vulnerable people like Sydney. Now, that doesn't make anyone guilty of her death, but it does put her squarely inside a dangerous system that rarely prioritizes the safety of people it uses. So, this isn't about painting villains. Please, it's not. It's about understanding the environment Cindy was navigating in, the pressure may have been under, and how deeply was she in the world where lines blur fast. Now, once those lines blur between cooperation and coercion, between help and harm, it becomes very hard to tell who was looking out for her and who wasn't. Then there's Captain Cook with the Licking County Sheriff's Department. His involvement didn't begin during the early days of the investigation. It began later, after word spread that I had possession of Sydney's tote. Now, this tote isn't symbolic, it's physical, it's real. A plastic storage bin, and it contains her papers. There's handwritten notes, phone numbers, letters, and it's fragments of her life, pieces that hadn't made it into any official file. Now, to be clear, Captain Cook was not aware of the tote before the information started circulating. But once it did, my phone rang, and he asked me to turn it over. There was no warrant or formal request, no documentation, just a verbal request. Now, I couldn't comply because the tote wasn't mine to give. So I did speak with James, and we talked through the implications carefully. Now, that tote, it was the last connection he had to his wife, the final collection of her personal belongings. And together, we made a decision not to release it without proper legal process. And that choice wasn't about defiance, it was about responsibility. Okay? Because once something like that, it leaves your hands, you don't have control where it goes or whether it ever comes back. And in cases like this, that matters. Detectives ask for things all the time, but this pointed something out that I've seen again in this case and again in this case. And that's real interest seemed to kick up once the public started paying attention, and that matters. Now, listen, again, I'm not accusing anyone of wrongdoing. I won't claim any more than this until I can vet every source I have. I want to vet it. But when you start digging to this case, I'm telling you, things get dangerous fast. I personally have been warned more than once that covering this case could put me at risk. But listen, here's what we're hearing. Sydney's name appears in over several different case files. Locals believe she was cooperating with law enforcement. That rumor followed her everywhere. And again, in her world, a rumor like that can get you killed. Sydney wasn't just surrounded by dangerous men on the streets. She was surrounded by a dangerous system, one that used women like her, drained them, and rarely protected them. Now, before we point fingers, we have to understand the world Sydney was navigating. Because outside those offices and case files, there was a whole other world waiting for her. A world built on favors, threats, and loyalties that don't blend. A web she never escaped. When locals talk about Sydney's case, they don't point to one bad guy. They talk about a web, a network. a knot of people whose lives and money and drugs and all the secrets are tied together in ways most folks never see. There were properties, and these weren't just homes, these were hubs, places where people gathered, where deals were made, where people came and went all hours, and where others disappeared. Then there were the enforcers, the muscle, the ones who handled the debts, the threats, and the dirty work. And the money guys, people with deep pockets and deeper ties, and connections to local players, to out of town deals. In a setup like that, knowing too much isn't power, it's a death sentence. And once you cross that invisible line between the streets and law enforcement, whether you're actually crossed it or not, people think you did, you understand real fast how someone can vanish without a trace and without a single person asking a question. Sydney was tangled in a world just like that. A world where the wrong piece of information in the wrong ears at the wrong time can hurt you, or worse. But a web only works when someone is isolated, and that's exactly where Cindy found herself once James went to jail. She wasn't just a new wife or a dancer or another name buried in court records. She was a woman stuck between two worlds, the streets and the system. And once people believed she was talking to law enforcement, whether she was or not, the danger around her multiplied. Because in that world, the rumor is enough to isolate you and terrify you and get you killed. We leave Sydney at the edge, alive but afraid, trying to crawl toward the future she would never reach, and surrounded by people who saw her as disposable. In the next episode, coming out tomorrow night at midnight, we're digging into what happened in those final weeks. The names, the places, the fires, the secrets people still avoid talking about. We'll follow the trail through the garages and the hotels and the ones who benefited from her silence. And we'll ask the hardest question of all: who put Sydney in those damn garbage bags? Because the truth is out there. We're not stopping until we find it. Okay, as we wrap up this episode, I'm going to give you a quick reminder. Everyone named in this episode is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Death, lies, and alibis is for informational and educational purposes only. I'm not a professional. I gather very public information and I present it to you to do your own research and form your own opinions. And that's it for this episode of Death, Lies, and Alibis. The story stops here for now, but the questions don't. Cold cases don't fall on their own. They take attention and pressure and people who care when others don't. Hit the follow button on the podcast so you don't miss the next episodes. Join our Facebook group for documents and case files and photos and ways to get involved. Or you email me at deathliesalibis@gmail.com. As always, be safe, stay alert, and never stop seeking justice.